Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and today I've got the Aussie crew back, and we are going to do a very special show. We are going to talk about three Australian artists, whether they're solo or bands that should have been bigger, whether it was internationally or bigger in Australia. So the panel of guests we've got Liam Hair from Pulse 94.7 FM in Geelong. Welcome,
G'day,
Liam, to the
g'day.
show.
Good to be here at last on this amazing show that I've heard so much about.
Good to have you on. And Peter Wicks, blended Scotch fan. Wicksy how are you going, mate?
Good, mate. Good. Good to see another Victorian on.
Yeah.
Yes. Wow. I'm an import.
You are indeed. And from sunny Brisbane, Bicyclelegs from the Bicyclelegs channel. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good. Looking forward to this.
So what we'll do is we'll go round robin. We'll pick one artist at a time, and we'll take it away. So I might start as I see it on the squares, and I'll throw it to you, Liam. Who's your first Australian artist that should have been huge internationally, or maybe even local?
Well, I'm going international for my first one. 90s act who are about to turn 30, and it's none other than the great Jebediah from Perth, Western Australia. Their act really sounded to me when I first heard them. They were similar to, at the time, the hugely successful presidents of the United States of America. It would also help that they would be an opener act for them for 2 years, from 1996 to 1997, when they did the rounds in Australia. They had potential to really take the alternative rock scene by storm, with their sound really fitting into that type of culture at the time, but I guess it was just never really meant to be. Their second album proved that they would have a tour up their sleeve. They did a US and Canada tour to promote Sunday Shambles alongside with Jimmy Eat World, and they also did a few tours in England in the early 2000s, but it just really didn't meant to be. But here in Australia, they didn't stop to falter. Their popularity still grows. Here's the set from the Talkie Hoteler gig that I went to this year. It was my first time seeing them. Absolutely blown away by the sound. In terms of albums, I would say their first two albums, Slightly Odd Way from 1997 and from 1999 of Sunday Shambles, are the best ones to go for, with Leaving Home, Please Leave, and also Harpoon as the recommended tracks.
What a cracker of a start to the show. I've seen them once. They're outstanding live band, and I do concur. They should have been big internationally. So well done, Liam. That's a great start to the show. Mr. Peter Wicks, what's your first artist that you'd like to bring to everyone's attention?
Well, I'm going to go with a band of the same era as Jebediah, which is a great pick, by the way.
Thank you.
And I'm going to go with local legends Def FX.
Yes.
I don't know if anybody's had the chance to see them, but I've seen them probably more times than I've had hot dinners, and they are just fantastic live. I think Fiona Horn just goes off on stage. She just goes nuts, and Sean Lowry has the whole thing backed up, and they just have this wall of sound with full on grungy guitar riffs over the top. It's just incredible. Best known for their drummer, or lack of. One of their tours was called "Where's That Effing Drummer?" Because that's what they used to get asked all the time. Because they don't have a drummer, it was all done with electronic drums. But they just had a full-on sound. They were way ahead of their time. Like, we're talking industrial rock before it became a big thing with the likes of Nine Inch Nails and White Zombie and bands like that. But anyway, best songs, Surfers of the Mind, which was their first single, Mask, and Angel in the Devil's Sky, and best album I'm going to put down as Lightspeed Collision, which was from 1993. They actually reformed last year, I think, or it might have been the year before, and did a brief tour, but anyway, I missed it, unfortunately. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a total head scratch why they weren't bigger, because, in electronica in the late 90s, early 2000s, they should have broken huge.
Yeah.
And they were definitely on a par with a lot of the acts that were coming out of the UK or some of the more orientated acts in Europe. So that's a total head scratch. Fiona, I go back to the olden days, her punk band on the Waterfront label, the Mothers. Remember seeing her when she was just starting out. So she definitely sort of morphed into somebody that was quite a charismatic front woman. And Def FX were, really smashed it live. Great band.
She was also in another band called Greenhouse Keepers, who I saw. This is pre-Def FX. I'm pretty sure it was Greenhouse Keepers. And they played the Hard-On's first birthday party on a Harbour cruise that I went on. And
the infamous Harbour cruise that you continually talk about.
Yes.
Maybe we should devote a whole show. But maybe what stays on tour remains on tour. Hey, Pete?
Exactly.
All right. Bicyclelegs, bring a bit of sanity to the show. What have you got?
All right. For my first pick, I'm going to go parochial. I'm going to go with a Brisbane band. I think they should have been big internationally, but I also think they should have been a lot bigger here. And the band I'm talking about is the Go-Betweens.
Go-Betweens. Yes. Nice choice.
Now,
absolutely.
Their early stuff, I can kind of understand why that wasn't bigger. It was, sort of post-punk, a little angular, that sort of thing.
Spiky.
By the time you're getting to this album, it's just beautiful jangle pop. It's, lush, it's rich, the lyrics are so deep. And I mean, this album has their biggest song, which is Streets of Your Town. But even that song here in Australia, do you know what chart position that song got to in Australia?
Let's hear it.
I'll have a guess. 48.
Yeah.
Lower top 50.
68.
Oh,
ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. None of their albums in Australia even got into the top 40. It's just ludicrous how a band who are considered so influential, they have a bridge named after them here in Brisbane. There is the Go-Between Bridge that you can get from one side of the river to the other.
Nice.
Didn't know that.
So hugely influential band, but never sold a lot of records. And especially when you're getting into this period of the band, their sound is accessible, it's joyous, even though the lyrics, I mean, you take the Streets of Your Town, musically, it's absolutely upbeat and joyous, but lyrically, it's got a bit of a darker edge to it, which I always really love about that song. But you get that with, musically, it's catchy, it's bright, it hooks you in. It should have been huge, but they just never sold a lot of product. And to me, that's a complete head scratch as to why, especially their 80s albums, didn't sell more records. So, yeah, that's my first pick, Go-Betweens.
Fantastic pick. My theory is they were maybe one album away from breaking it, at least locally, but they broke up. And there was a lot of interpersonal issues because they're all in relationships, and it's all very Fleetwood Mac rumors. But I think they were one album, if they stuck at it, of breaking it big, because they did make a comeback, but it was just the blokes that were left.
Yeah.
One thing I've got to say, McLennan has got to be up there with the pantheon of Australian singer-songwriters. He's way up there.
Yeah, so absolutely.
That's a solid goal choice. All right. Well, my first pick, we're talking about singer-songwriters and upper pantheon. This singer-songwriter is criminally underrated. So when you think of the great singer-songwriters of Australia, like Don Walker, Nick Cave, Paul Kelly, this bloke kind of gets ignored, and he should be spoken about because he really spoke about the observations of Australia life, especially in the 70s and the 80s. And I'm talking about Richard Clapton. Yes. He is one of the most outstanding singer-songwriters. I would describe him as part Jackson Browne, a little bit of Springsteen. He is a wonderful lyricist. Albums like Goodbye Tiger, Great Escape, Glory Road, fantastic songs. I mean, the songs, Deep Water, Down in the Lucky Country, I Am an Island, Girls on the Avenue. They're part of pop culture, but he didn't sell a ton of records. And, you know, a lot of folk in 2024, they talk about Paul Kelly, they talk about Nick Cave, but Richard Clapton doesn't get spoken about. And, you know, if this little show does something to correct that, well, then, you know, that's a positive. Fantastic lyricist. He was just, you know, so socially observant. He got the ARIA Hall of Fame in 1999, but he just didn't sort of translate into international success. I think there was a lot of mystique around him. You know, like early on, you saw his face, but, you know, I think around the late 70s, he had this persona of having the dark sunglasses. But live, man, I've seen him quite a few times, and he always surrounded himself with fantastic musicians and absolutely a powerhouse sort of live performer. He does about 1 or 2 shows a year, plays the State Theatre in Sydney, and it does a sellout. So there is a following there, but he should have been huge because on a world stage, he's up there with your Jackson Browns and Springsteens, and he's kind of almost at a Dylan-esque level. But even in our own country, they talk about other singer-songwriters and he gets lost in the weeds. So Richard Clapton for me.
Yeah, good choice.
Yeah,
Nice.
excellent.
All right, back over to me for round 2.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so, well, it's 50 years for a lot of bands, and I think for this particular act, no doubt should be a massive celebration coming next month. Of course, talking about the Melbourne-based band Skyhooks. We wouldn't be remiss not to talk about them. It was the band that formed Mushroom Records, but also at the same time was the band that could have broken them at the same time. We would not be remiss in talking about Living in the 70s, also the first album Michael Guninsky put out as a producer there. And yeah, again, same deal. First one he put out, that could also have broken the straw as well. Influenced Midnight Oil with their early few albums talking about the observations there in Melbourne, in which Midnight Oil would talk about their observations in Sydney. Albums that I would recommend, basically whole of Shell's run from Living in the 70s up to Guilty Until Proven Insane. I think a perfect quartet of albums. And as for songs, Horror Movie, Somewhere in Sydney, and Women in Uniform. As metal fans would know, Women in Uniform got a goods cover done by Iron Maiden on the Killers album.
Well, that's a great choice. And it'd be wrong for me not to plug a show that Bicyclelegs and I did on Skyhooks. Check out the Bicyclelegs channel, which I will put underneath. And that was definitely a great conversation, but love Skyhooks as well as you do, Daniel.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think one of the big mistakes that Skyhooks made trying to crack America was that the first single they put out in America was Mercedes Ladies. And it's like, that wasn't even a single here. And I don't know why they chose that song. It's a good song, but I don't think it was the strength of that band. I think a song like Horror Movie would have been a much better choice. I feel like that one's, again, I understand they were going for something that wasn't too Australian. And I think Horror Movie would have worked in that respect because I think, you know, the idea of the horror movie and the news bulletins and all that sort of thing would have translated into America really, really well. So I think they made a big mistake there with the choice of single.
Yeah, I did a show on the Sea of Tranquility, and the topic was you had all these different folk from different countries about bands that didn't translate, and I picked Skyhooks. And I sort of said that Skyhooks were probably maybe too Australian for the American market. And a lot of Australian bands in the 70s picked the wrong tour. Yeah. You know, like, for example, the biggest example I can bring in that category is like Dragon went and supported Johnny Winter. And, you know, the Johnny Winter fans were never going to gravitate to Dragon. In respect to Skyhooks, they did a tour with Foghat and Uriah Heep. Don't think that's quite the right mix. And they did a tour of the southern states of America and just didn't get that traction. So wrong song choice, wrong single, lack of record company support, and the wrong tour. But it's really important when you do that tour, of that initial tour of America, you've got to get the right band.
I think
Yeah.
I think other fans have said, had they done maybe Guillotine Tool Proven Insane, that they could have done it because they had women in uniform then, which was a huge hit, and they could have really translated well in the American market. It did top 100 in the UK, so there's something.
I'll put it to you guys. Maybe what about if they did the other way? Instead of going to America, what about go to England?
Yes, like what Split
In
Ends did.
75, you look at Top of the Pops, there was a lot of color, there was a lot of glam. So aesthetically, they would have fit in. Music was a little bit more satirical, a bit sharper than your Sweets and your Slades. But I could see that would have been an easier sell with the UK market than going to America. Do you think that would have been a better route for them?
Yeah, they probably would have done a Split Ends, actually. Now I'm looking at it. Because Split Ends, they did 76 in America. And that's what broke up the original 7. And then they came back to the UK and they really started to get an audience. So they could have done a Split Ends route and still would have been making records into the 80s with Shell, no problem.
Yeah, I think America was brutal in the 70s for Australian acts. I think you really had to be a band like a LRB, which is basically like selling ice to the Eskimos, because it's that sort of easy listening music that was already in line with the West Coast rock of the Eagles. But a band that's edgy like Skyhooks, that would always be a tough sell, I think.
Yeah.
Well, AC/DC kicked off in the UK before, the US. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's easier to go to the UK, break it there, and then platform over to America. But I think a lot of these bands wanted just to parachute to America, because let's face it, that was manna from heaven. If you had a lucrative concert tour in America, you get exposure and you get the money. But yeah. Anyway,
the UK is a softer landing because there's so many Aussies there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So exactly.
You're going to pull a crowd.
Yep.
So, yeah.
All right. Thanks, Liam. Pete, what's your second pick?
Well, I'm going to go a little bit way out there, which will surprise you, Pete, no doubt. And I'm going to go with a band called Machine Gun Fellatio. I don't know if any of you have seen them live, but
yes, I have.
Yes, they're an act that's not easily forgotten when after you've seen them live. It's quite a spectacle they put on. Their music is very hard to describe. Like it's like they can do virtually any style. Like a lot of dancey beats. They're just an unusual mix of styles. So, but anyway, as a live act, they were just phenomenal. Like it was like watching a circus on a smaller stage. It was full on. Like it had a lot of it was controversial because there was a lot of nudity involved in their shows. Yeah, phenomenal live band, and they're touring again at the moment. There's a festival I think that's doing the rounds this summer with Tism as the headliner.
This is Serious Mum, yeah.
Yeah, and Machine Gun Fellatio are number 2 on the ticket. But yeah, anyway, fantastic band. Anyway, my favourite song of theirs is 100 Fresh Disciples, and it's from the album Bring It On. But other songs that people might know, Girl of My Dreams. Girl of My Dreams is giving me nightmares. Roller Coaster.
Yeah, I've seen them, and I think they're like the bastard child of Skyhooks. Zany characters on stage. There are a few of them.
Yeah, quite a little.
I Spit on Your Grady in the 80s. I don't know if you ever saw them, but there are a few of these sort of, they're kind of semi-jokey, but there is a serious edge to them. But you look at them on stage and it's a cavalcade of different characters. And I all think, if you look at a tree trunk, it comes back to Skyhooks. So I think that was a good little segue from Liam to your band.
I can see that, yeah.
Yep.
I can see that, yeah. Yeah.
All right. Bicyclelegs, what's your second pick?
All right. My second pick is related to an Australian band that actually did do quite well. Mental as Anything were an institution in Australia. They even had like a couple of hits overseas, things like Live It Up and that sort of thing. Then they went on hiatus for a while. And my 2 favourite songwriters from the band were Reg Mombassa and Peter O'Doherty, and they formed a band called Dog Trumpet. And this has been their going concern ever since. They're still going around, they're still touring, they're still putting albums out. Very Mental as Anything, as you would expect from these two guys, because they, write a lot of the songs for Mental as Anything. This has got a wonderful single on it called Gene. This is their first album. They later on did an album called Antisocial Tendencies, which the title track is just an absolute laugh riot. But I never understood why Dog Trumpet did not bring some of the audience from Mental as Anything, because I saw this band play live in 2013 in a small venue here in Brisbane. And I'm not exaggerating when I say there were about 30 or 40 people in the audience. That's it.
Yeah.
And there was two legends of Australian music. All right, they were born in New Zealand, but they've done all their music here in Australia. They've lived in Australia since they were fairly young. And there's nobody there to see their show. There's nobody buying their records. And they still have that wonderful wit of those Mental as Anything records, and the music is great. Reg Mombassa's guitar playing, that slide guitar and all that sort of thing, it's all there in these Dog Trumpet records, and nobody's listening to them and nobody's buying them, and it's a real shame. The only thing I can think of is the one thing that's missing from Dog Trumpet is those voices, is Greedy Smith and Martin Plaza.
Yes.
But the songs are all there, the guitar playing's all there, the wit is all there. All the other parts that make Mental as Anything great are here in these Dog Trumpet records. And as I say, nobody's buying them and nobody's going to see them in concert. And it's an absolute shame.
Yeah. Well said. I'll go one step further, and I think Mental as Anything should have been bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they had Live It Up off the back of that brief moment in Crocodile Dundee, became a surprise hit in the UK. I think they troubled some of the lower reaches of the US charts, but they were never big, and they should have been, because they had a phenomenal success rate of hit singles in Australia, right up to that last song from the Young Einstein soundtrack, I think, Bicyclelegs, which was rock and roll music, which may have killed their career over here, because I don't think they did as well. But they should have been much bigger. You got any theories, Bicyclelegs, why Mental as Anything weren't as big as they should have been overseas? Too quirky?
Yeah, I think maybe a little too quirky. Yeah. I think they needed, to get it overseas, I think they needed to sort of promote Greedy a bit more, because he was the commercial voice, Martin Plaza had that wonderful croon, but it also had that kind of odd edge to it, if you know what I mean, which I always loved about Martin Plaza's voice, I have
slightly
to say.
Roy Orbison, wasn't it?
Yeah. But I don't know. Again, not in topic the way Skyhooks were, but just sound-wise, maybe a little too Australian.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, the sense of humour is Australian, and I think Americans at the time didn't really get the Australian sense of humour.
But Australia was the flavour of the month for a brief nanosecond in America with Men at Work.
Yes.
So, okay, you talk about quirkiness. Down Under, Men at Work. That is, you look at the film clip, it's as quirky as all get. Now, how come that's a hit and some of Mental as Anything songs, which are better than that, in my opinion, didn't have that cut through?
Yeah.
I think Mental as Anything was a bit more subtle with their humour, though, than Men at Work were kind of... It was like straightforward with their, Vegemite sandwich and all those. Yeah.
And Men at Work, especially with Down Under, had a bit of that sort of Police sound to it too, which Americans were just absolutely nuts about the Police.
Colin Hay had that
80s.
Sting, that tonality, which they went gaga for. But a bit of a head scratch with Mental as Anything. But Dog Trumpet, yes, And they are still going around. And folks, if you see them in your town, if they play in your town, please check them out.
Yeah.
Great band.
Yeah.
All right. This is another head scratch that should have been huge. They were briefly signed to Sony Records, and in my opinion, they probably recorded one of the great Australian albums of all time. It's least in the top 20. And I'm talking a band called Died Pretty. They started in 1983 as a Sydney alternative rock band, heavily influenced by Velvet Underground, a bit of Psych, Bob Dylan. But over, first two albums, Free Dirt in 1986, Lost in 1988. But in my opinion, their greatest album was Doughboy Hollow, which had the wonderful DC, Stop Myself and Sweetheart. This band was passionate. Their songs that tugged at the heartstrings. They had an ear for beautiful melodies, and it was distinctly Australian, and it was social observation about relationships and the Australian way of life, led by the late, great Ron Pino, Brett Myers on guitars, just a wonderful band. Doughboy Hollow, I tell you what, DC, every time I hear that song, it's just got so much emotional sweep. It brings a shiver up my spine in a good way. I love it. It really tugs at the heartstrings. So they get signed to Sony Records. They put another almost as good album called Trace. They were signed in 1993. And, they were on the cusp of big things. Trace hit number 100 on the US Billboard charts. They were ready to go on a 3-week tour of America and get on the David Letterman show. And then there was a Sony conference in Glen Eagles in Scotland, 1993, where there were all these different Sony acts that were representing different countries, and they were doing a 3-song set. There was a head honcho from Columbia Records, and he saw the band, didn't like the look of Ron Peno, and they got dropped. Doesn't that fucking suck? Seriously.
Yes.
So maybe they're not the pin-ups or the most aesthetically pleasing looking band, but boy, they were Australia's answer to REM. In my opinion, their songs were majestic, and it just goes to show that some bean counters or some record executives, just on the basis of 3 songs in a conference, can drop a band. It's just tragic. So they went home, they did an Australia tour, they put out some more albums, but that's gut-wrenching, and that just goes to show that sometimes things just aren't fair, and it's just could be the stroke of a pen of somebody who didn't like the look of Ron Peno or the band. But do yourself a favor, folks. Doughboy Hollow, Died Pretty. I'll thump the table. It's one of Australia's greatest rock albums, and you've got to do. They're a great band, and they should have been huge. Gents, anything else to say about Ron Peno or Died Pretty?
I'm just so glad you picked them, because they were a band that I was looking at choosing and ended up not choosing. So thank you for picking them, because I really felt bad for leaving them out of my 3. Just a little lame claim to fame, as it were. I had an old friend called John Keelstra, who's unfortunately no longer with us. He actually went to university up here in Brisbane at Griffith University with Ron Peno. So
Ooh.
There you go. Oh, well, that's a nice little shout out. But look, criminally underrated. And I'll keep on fighting the fight for people to discover. And that's what, shows like this are all about, discovering new music or bands that you may have missed.
Yeah.
All right. Liam, third pick.
Third pick, sort of that same deal with like Mental as Anything. They had their kind of moment in the spotlight, and more recently they got another moment in the spotlight once again. Talk about the Machinations. So band out of Sydney, they kind of moved, they were kind of around at the same time. Pub Rock's act were going around, but they were synth pop, so they were more in vein of like Shooter Echo, which I think you guys touched on in the top 10 1980s Australian songs. They had the promise to break out to America with No Say in It, being on the MTV charts at one point. but tour never really just happened. But they still ever remained popular here in Australia. Songs I'd recommend: Pressure Sway, My Heart's on Fire, which apparently for some reason the 12 that I own here apparently goes for $1,000 on Discogs. Don't ask, don't know why.
I'm going to grab it. Thank you.
That's right.
I want that.
Yes, and also one that I think as well from in between Esteem and Big Music, Jumping the Gap. I've found to love a lot, and I love that not album single. In terms of albums, I would say the first two ones, Esteem and Big Music, are my go-tos.
Fantastic. And funny, like Bicyclelegs and I were texting, I think about 3 or 4 weeks ago, because I was on a bit of a Machinations binge on YouTube and just admiring and just saying, this band had so many killer songs and they should have been bigger.
Yeah.
I've got a theory why they didn't break big. I don't think they were pin-up. I don't think their singer, Fred, had those pin-up looks. In synth pop world or pop, that might have been the glass ceiling. Unfortunately, aesthetics play a big part, but by God, their productions were right up there. Like that My Heart's on Fire, that sounds like it was produced by Trevor Horn. Or the ZTT, could be on the ZTT label, Propaganda, bands like that. It was just world class. Very clever, great arrangements, brilliant songs. Should have been huge.
Yeah. If I was going to sum them up in one phrase, it would be like hard-hitting funk.
Yes.
Yeah, should have been bigger. Nice pick. All
Thank
right.
you.
Peter, Wicks, what do you got for the third?
Well, I'm doing something a little bit different. Doing a band that's current that should be a lot bigger than what they are. And that band is Amyl and the Sniffers.
Yes.
I don't know if any of you have heard them or seen them.
Love them.
But,
know them.
Yeah.
Seen them.
Taylor and that band are a powerhouse. They just when you get hit with them, it's like being hit by a truck. It's fantastic band. They've got a new album coming out next month, which sounds like it's going to be an absolute corker. There's been 2 singles off it so far, and both of them are fantastic. But anyway, the first album, which is a self-titled album, my favourite has one of my favourite tracks of theirs, which is called Gacked on Anger. Gack basically means full to the brim, and it's basically a song about poverty. And the way it's delivered is she delivers it like she's an angry girl in a pub, yelling it at you. It's just phenomenal. And my favourite album of theirs would be Comfort to Me, which was their last album. That's got Guided by Angels and Hurts, 2 great songs. Yeah, they're just an absolute powerhouse. And I know they've had some success in the UK, but I think they should be a hell of a lot bigger than what they are. And I think part of their problem is there's no commercial radio stations over here that would ever play their music. And I'm sure your radio station lends.
Probably, I would say maybe, depending on what show it is. But Triple J, yes.
Triple J, they get a little bit of a showing, but yeah, they're a band that should be a lot bigger than what they are. Amy Taylor reminds me a lot of Chrissy Amphlett, not in looks, but in the whole attitude. She's just got that in your face, this is who I am, and screw you if you don't like it. Yeah,
they're bogan rock, but it's wonderful.
Yeah.
There's all these bogan rock bands. There's another band called the Chats. And it's back to the 70s, and
yes.
I love Amy. I think she's wonderful, and she describes herself as Angry Anderson meets Dolly Parton. And when I interviewed Angry Anderson, he goes, "Oh, we're old farts. Nobody listens to." And I go, "You'd be surprised." "Oh, okay, hit me with a band." I said, "Amyl and the Sniffers," and he was stoked that he's been name-checked as an influence. But I've seen them live. They're the best live act in Australia. at the moment, bar none. They are popular. I think their last album went to number 2, but they should be like stadium popular.
Yeah.
They played Glasgow. So they're on the rise in the UK. America's a bit more challenged.
Yeah.
Europe, they seem to be doing all right.
Europe, they're doing okay, but America is a frontier. They're trying to get their head around it because it's a very Australian type. A lot of people are referencing that this band reminds them of the Plasmatics. Maybe it's the aesthetics. But they are a band on the rise, but yeah, they should be at this point huge.
Yeah, huge, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I will say one thing as far as hopefully them breaking in America is I know that someone who is a big fan of
Michael Pilmer.
Yes. And
Devo.
he works with Devo. So so hopefully he can have some influence there to help them crack it in America.
Yeah.
Their clips are really good too.
Oh, yes. They're like little mini stories. Hertz is fantastic. But she's captivating. And your eyes are on her. She is just a force of nature. And they're the best live band in Australia, bar none. Yeah, that's my opinion. Well done. Bicyclelegs, bring it home. Number 3.
All right. Well, I'm going to go probably as far away from Amyl and the Sniffers as you possibly can, because I'm going to be picking a band who are from the 70s and who were a progressive rock band. And I feel like they really should have been big in Europe, and they never were. They weren't really all that big here either, to be honest. And that is Sebastian Hardie.
Oh, yeah.
This album is just a masterpiece of symphonic progressive rock. You know, if you're into Yes and that sort of thing, I actually discovered this band. I didn't know them until 2003. And Yes actually toured here in Australia with like the classic lineup, you know, John Anderson, Chris Squires, Steve Howe, Rick Wakeman, Alan White. Just classic Yes lineup. The opening act was a reformed Sebastian Hardie.
Ooh.
And they played like about a half an hour to 45-minute set. They are, to this day, the only opening act I have ever seen who got a standing ovation at the end of their set.
Interesting.
So, but just wonderful. I mean, you've got 4 moments. This is their debut, 4 moments. The title track is a sidelong epic, and it is just, as I say, if you're into that sort of Yes sound, that symphonic progressive rock, this should have been huge in Europe, you know, because that sort of music was massive in 1975. And this could have made it really big. They were on a proper label too. This is on Polydor Records. So this isn't some indie release or anything like that. You know, they're on a major label. They unfortunately only ever released 2 albums originally. And then there was a 3rd album, like the band kind of split in 2. And half of the band formed a band called Wind Chase, which was actually the name of Sebastian Hardie's 2nd album. And they did another album called Symfinity, which is wonderful too. But, I mean, you know, by the late 70s, obviously, they would have been struggling anyway because of punk rock and all that sort of thing. But in the sort of mid-70s, they could have been massive, should have been massive, and unfortunately, they never were.
Well said. And I've seen that album everywhere, and I've got to pick it up. Every record store I see, it's displayed on the side of the walls or something like that. So it's a cult album, and I reckon it's ticked over Bicyclelegs since release. Keeps on ticking over. It's one of those albums like Chain, Back to the Blues. I reckon it's probably gone gold or at least platinum by now.
Yeah, it's gone gold here in Australia, but it took a very, very long time.
It's word of mouth. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, hopefully a few more will get it word of mouth now.
Yeah.
Hope so.
Yeah.
Hope so. Speaking of record sales, I am going to get as far away from you guys and Bicycle Legs are the last choice as you can get. And this might be surprising on Rock Daydream Nation, but I've got to say it because this whole premise of the show is an artist that should have been huge. Now, whether I like this artist's work or, I'm a passionate collector of this artist's albums is another thing. But I think I've got to talk about this particular person. Born in England, had a novelty song in Australia in the early 70s or maybe late 60s. I'm not sure, with the dates. Released an album in 1986, which was probably the third largest selling album of all time in Australia. The biggest selling Australian artist album of all time. And I'm talking about John Farnham.
Fonzie.
I'm bringing John Farnham up because I just think that on the basis of his voice, and he had a wonderful set of pipes, he was up there with Lou Gramm, Foreigner. He's up there with Steve Perry. You may not like his music, but it's a total head scratch that bar You're the Voice off Whispering Jack hitting top 10 in England, he wasn't bigger. Mm-hmm. And I know that it was mooted. Deep Purple he was in the mix to front Deep Purple when they got Ian Gillan out of the band briefly. Joe Lynn Turner got the role, yes. And there were other sort of projects now. He fronted LRB,
yes,
which to me was a bit of a strange mix because he's a very LRB were, I think with John Farnham became a little bit more AOR, a little bit more new wavy, like Playing to Win as an example, which doesn't sound like the Glenn Shorrock Little River Band.
Well, even like Wade Nelson with like Night Owls on Time Exposure.
Yeah, absolutely. But look, I like his vocals. He does have a tendency to oversing sometimes. I don't like his version of Help, kind of. That was a little bit on the wrong side of the ledger. But, I listened to Whispering Jack recently, and I know I'm going to do a show. I'm going to drag him kicking and screaming, Bicycle Legs. We're going to do a little bit of a defending Whispering Jack, but I can understand why it was a hit. And to think that this guy was basically playing RSL clubs, he was on the skins of his butt, had no money, and Glenn Shorrock, his manager, ex of Masters Apprentices, mortgaged his house and believed in him, and it became a hit. It's got a kind of a real sort of rags to riches story. It's a real sort of underdog story that makes it compelling. And I can understand a lot of the tracks on that album were very well selected because John Farnham is not a singer-songwriter. He's just a singer, interpreter, and You're the Voice was inspired. And it's earwiz, and you can understand why it was a hit. And Pressure Down and Touch of Paradise, the song from Ross Wilson. I think he selected some really great songs. Look, do I like all of his stuff? No, but I just think vocally, it's the sort of music that America would have gravitated to, and it's a real head scratch why he didn't sort of become bigger. What do you think, gents? Do you think it was like selling ice to the Eskimos? They probably had enough Blue Grams and
Michael Bolton
berries, and they didn't
Michael
have
Bolton, yes,
with a similar style mullet. I don't know why he never got picked up. I mean, I'm certainly not a fan. I can certainly admire his voice, but but I don't understand why he didn't get bigger.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether he had record company backing him up in the US, because, I mean, here he was on Wheatley Records, which is a local label.
RCA, I think he was affiliated with too.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether that translated over into, like, I'd have to look on Discogs and see who actually released it in the US. But even if you get a major label deal, as we've seen, it also takes the label to actually push you. Yeah. And whether the label actually gave him the push he needed in the US, it sounds like they probably didn't. So that's probably got a lot to do with it too.
Do you think over here he spent a lot of time on telly too. Like he was constantly on Hey Hey It's Saturday.
TV personality.
Yeah.
Yeah, TV personality. But seriously, just before this album, 2 years, like mid-80s, he was on Skid Row and, just playing to 10 people, like the dog trumpet story, playing North Ride RSL in front of 10 people. It was really dire. So it's a real success story how Glenn Wheatley turned it around. And with Whispering Jack, and the rest is history. Folks, guys, do you think if he stuck at Little River Band, that might have been the key to breaking America instead of being the solo?
Yes. In my opinion, yes. For him, I think it was the stupid move that they quit only after 4 dates on the No Rains tour. He said to the band that he'd be leaving to start a solo career, that he had an album. Obviously, Whispering Jack was already starting to do production, so that took his time. So if he'd stayed with LRB, maybe they had got maybe Glenn Shorrock back as well. So it's like him and John. It could have worked.
That's an interesting one. I don't know if the egos would have prevailed. I know there was some factions in the band that didn't like John being there because I watched the documentary. And John had a different sort of style fronting LRB. He was very much a front man and liked to work the audience. And one time I read a story, they actually bolted the microphone stand on stage so he couldn't move it. And so it was be front and center. So there were definitely some factions within that band that didn't like what he was doing. But anyway, it's a test case. I wouldn't say that I've got every single one of John Farnham's, but I've always admired his voice and the tonality, and it's just a head scratch that he didn't become more internationally famous. And I'm serving the purpose of this show.
Yeah,
artists that should have been bigger. All right, so there we have done our 3. Why don't we do around the grounds with some honourable mentions? So Liam, what have you got?
I got a local act similar to Divinal, similar to Amyl and the Sniffers. They are currently supporting Jebediah on the Oix tour, Magic Dirt.
Ah, there's one of mine.
Yes, a great honorable mention. And you could not talk about Magic Dirt with the absolute front woman that is Adelita. Same personality, the attitude, thing like Amyl and Chrissy Amphlett. Great sound, hard punk rock sound. And like Jebediah, they still remain popular in Australia to this day, but never really made a dent on the international market. For me, Watch Out Boys, Ice, and Plastic Loveless Letters are 3 songs that I recommend with Life Was Better, Snow White, and Tough Love are their albums of choice.
Stuff.
Couldn't agree more.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's it for me.
No. I'm saying to Pete because you might have stolen his choice.
You did. He did. They're written down. Magic Dirt.
All right. Well, what have you got to say about Magic Dirt, Pete?
We could.
They are awesome. Yeah, Adelita is another force of nature. They're also supporting the Hoodoo Gurus on some of their as well for their comeback. So fantastic band. I was actually overseas at their peak time in Australia, so I missed a lot of the hype. But great band, and Tough Love is the album to get, definitely.
Absolutely. I've only seen them once, and I should have seen them more. I saw them support UMI, but they're one of those bands that I really like, but I've only seen them once. It's just been one of those things. But yeah, that's a great pick.
I have a great gig story from when I saw them at Torquay Hotel. Adelita threw her guitar on the roof railings at the end of their gig. Just literally yanked it up there. The roadies had to get it down.
Right.
Classic Adelita to do that.
And there was no replacement guitar.
They just pulled it down, and she continued to use it the next gig.
Okay. Business as usual.
Yeah.
All right, Bicyclelegs, what's your honourable pick or picks?
Okay. I'll a couple quickly. Firstly, as I said, when you picked it as one of your main picks, Died Pretty, absolutely. Should have been huge. Should have been big here in Australia, and they weren't. The couple of others that I'll quickly mention, I think the Angels should have been bigger in the overseas. They had, the sort of thinking man's AC/DC, some people call them, that sort of thing. I think they could have been huge in America, and they should have been. But again, I think record label stuff got in the way and that sort of thing. And the other one I'm going to mention, and this one just came to mind, Peter, because you were talking about John Farnham, talking about a band, an artist that maybe isn't one of your favorite artists, but you can see that they should have been huge. And that's what this one is for me, and that's Noiseworks.
Nice
Noiseworks with that anthemic, arena rock that could have been massive in the States. Not necessarily my sort of personal choice in music. I'm not a big arena rock guy, but they had the sound. They had the lead vocalist who could, project to 80,000 people if he was given the opportunity. John Stevens, great set of lungs on that guy. They had the songs, the catchy songs, but that they just never sort of made a scratch overseas, did they? So that's my other honorable mention.
Like some of their songs had that sort of U2 anthemic feel, like Touch is the song, or I don't know if that's the song, but that's
Better as well. Better seems like a bit of a Joshua Tree era one.
Yeah, but their first album, I think, is really, really strong, and I agree. They had a very charismatic frontman, and they should have been much bigger. And John Stevens was briefly the lead singer for In Excess for a year or two, so had to definitely fill some big shoes there.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
My honourable mention's Renee Geyer, probably Australia's greatest soul singer. She was, you close your eyes and you'd think that she was like American. She was just had the most wonderful voice. Highlight songs, Man's World, Stairs and Whispers. She could do blues, she could do jazz, but she could do soul, and she could have been much bigger than she was. She did a lot of session work in America, but didn't sort of break in that market. Yeah. And you've got to face it, America's a very competitive market in the R&B and soul area, but she was definitely one of Australia's greatest soul singers as far as I'm concerned. And I've got a lot of her 70s albums, and I recommend any of those 70s albums are definitely worth picking up. Gents, this has been fantastic because I think we've drawn different experiences, like from the 70s, the 60s, 90s, even a little bit more current. And I think we've given our viewers a fair sort of hearing of bands, in our opinion, that should have been much, much bigger on the world stage. And we will definitely get this crew together and do another Aussie show, because this is the Aussie crew.
Oh, yeah.
Liam Hair, quick plug on your show on Pulse 94.7 FM, which is my channel as well. So,
oh, yes. We got two shows. Wednesday, 6 p.m. at Screws on the Record. Great vinyl show if you're a lover of the old 45s and the 33s. We do a lot of deep cuts and obviously some Aussie artists as well. MTV charts and, of course, the classic countdowns. Can't go wrong with those. 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. on the Fridays, Limo and Joshua. We do the hottest weekend charts, but we also like to do a bit of throwback and a bit of local highlights as well. So 94.7thepulse.com is where you can find us.
Wicksy Leaks. Peter Wicks, check him out. Yep. And Bicyclelegs, wonderful show. I'm always on there periodically, and we've got a show coming up which will drop before this show on the wonderful Laurie Anderson. Can't wait to see that, but always great stuff. Any other shows you want to plug, Bicyclelegs, coming up?
Yeah, well, our friend Liam right here will be appearing on my channel next month when we are going to be picking our favourite song from each Split Enz album. Yes. So look out for that one in October.
Oh, well, you need a month to prepare for that. That'll be very difficult to... Jeez.
That's another band that never really hit it big overseas either.
Yeah, except for one album. One album they really had.
Yeah. There you go. All right.
They should have been where Crowded House was years later.
Absolutely. Thank you, gentlemen. So please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Tell us your picks of what Australian artists should have been bigger. I'll put the links with all the gentlemen's where you can find them on other channels. And one thing's for sure, you'll see the Aussie crew next month talking more Aussie music. See you later.